my name's Graham Crowley and I curate what's called Silent Disco, which is a group show, and it's in my studio in Wickham Market. Happens every summer, and this is probably the 5th time we've done it, I think, 4th or 5th time. And there are 31 people in the show. They have nothing in common stylistically. The work, it's an attempt to show work that's diverse and perhaps deserves to be more widely known and appreciated. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk around and talk about all the work. And I'm going to start with this piece by Lothar Goetz, right? Lothar, incidentally, for those of you who may or may not know, Lothar is responsible for one of the most wonderful, I think, brilliant piece of public art. And there's not a great deal of, what we say, high quality public art in Britain or anywhere else for that matter. But he painted the outside of the Towner, right? The Towner Gallery in Eastbourne, right, on the south coast. And if you have the time or you're interested or you don't necessarily live in Eastbourne because you already know about it, it is painted in this extraordinary way. So it puts me in mind historically of Wadsworth's Dazzle ships, which are designed to break down the profile of, this was in battleships in World War I, but this is something completely different. I find the work electric, it's like a gut punch. You really feel present and you feel the presence of the work. So that's Lothar Goetz, and he shows quite regularly with Domo Bal in London. Now, some of the work is in pairs. That's not to say they're twinned, it's just that I want to talk about them and bounce them off each other, right? So this, first off, this is indicative of the diversity. It's as simple as that, right? That this painting, in terms of appearance, has nothing in common with this one, right? Superficially, right? So this is about certainty, it's about measurement, right? But this little piece of work here, which is basically, it's pastels and watercolour on paper, so it's a fairly conventional piece of painting or drawing, however you want to look at it. Now this is by a man called Alan Smith, and Alan and I were at St Martin's together. He left there a year after me. He left in 1973, and this is the first time he's ever shown a piece of work in a I was going to say a public gallery, or any kind of gallery or space, right? And the reason I think this is important is not because he hasn't shown before, but because the way that he goes about his work. Now he's very considered. I think he's one of the most intelligent people I've ever met. And also a quick shout for him, because he's the man. The two of us have installed this whole show in less than 2 days and stripped out the whole gallery as well. But Alan is, thoughtful to the point of inhibition, perhaps. I don't think he'll mind me saying that. He's so thoughtful. And he is struggling, and there's hesitancy, there's a nervousness about this. This is not about confidence or assertiveness. This is about thoughtfulness. Because Alan is an avid reader and has studied, and been offered places, but never actually taken them to study aesthetics and philosophy. This bears the title, not of such and such a ridge or somewhere looking out the back garden. It's called Tangible Freedom. Now, I don't want to get into that because that is a 6-part work by whoever. Right, except to say that for Alan, when I said to Alan, so what does that title mean to you? He said, well, one of the great freedoms that he realised rather later in life, that he'd discovered as a student, but actually had become separated from, was this wonderful, the only, for him and for myself, and that's why I identify with it, is the idea of tangible freedom is the experience of painting itself. It's as close, because both Alan and I would agree that the idea of freedom is a form of rhetoric, the term. We're bound. But we have liberty, perhaps. I won't go any further into it philosophically. Except for Alan and myself, the tangible freedom of the title of this is painting itself, the experience of that kind of mindfulness, that kind of attention, that all of this work in various different ways manifests. What I want to do now is talk about 2 other pieces here. First off, I can't help but laugh when I see this. This is by Annabel Dover. Annabel lives in Ipswich, and is a friend and a colleague, neighbour, whatever, practically. I saw this on her website, or a piece like this on her website, and most of Annabel's work is very sensitive, exquisitely refined watercolours, studies of objects that are talismanic, symptomatic of family, of loss, of grief, of identity. Right, but then right in the midst of all that sensitivity and thoughtfulness was a small painting that looked like this. And I don't think there's anybody alive wouldn't know how to describe that painting, right? It looks like what it looks like. There's no getting away from the fact that it looks like a 1970s or 80s cheap Hallmark Christmas card, right? Okay. Now, I'm always impressed and kind of fascinated by people who manage to make work that has little or nothing in terms of the thinking process with mine, right? Now, it would never cross my mind to actually make a painting that looked like a 1970s Christmas card. So I don't even know what the title is. I mean, I sincerely hope it's Happy Christmas for the obvious reason. But that is just, I think people quite often describe it as left field, right? Okay, right. Whilst we're talking about work that is, what should we say, left field, I think if we come back here, you'll see, look at it for a little while. This is a piece of work by a woman called Molly Thompson, and it's exquisitely made. This harks back theoretically, or in terms of its aesthetic pedigree, to the art of the real, when painting and sculpture were rubbing shoulders and were interchangeable. People were stretching or testing definitions. Yeah. Now, there is a shot of Molly's studio on her website on the net, and everything in that shot is beautifully considered and refined and thought about. But primarily, she asked the question, what are the boundaries? What defines painting? What are the boundaries? Right. And in that search for boundaries, a lot of people resort to formal devices, making things bigger, larger, or, etc. But by qualities that would describe the physical appearance, line, tone, colour, etc., the classic formalist thing. But at no point would anybody, or in my opinion, I have never, and I've met lots of people who paint and make art, but at no point until I saw this did I ever imagine that I would meet somebody or come across a piece of work where the person who created it, painter or artist, however they self-describe, thought to themselves, that hexagonal piece, that needs something. And then suddenly, ding, a light goes on and the word a wheel. The idea that a painting needs a wheel, it hadn't crossed my mind, and I'm kind of guessing that maybe it's not crossed many other people's minds, but this has, when I say wheel, I mean caster. And when I saw this on the internet, I thought, that is brilliant. That's really got my juices going. That's really got under my skin in a really good way. I think it's a stunning piece. Incongruous doesn't begin to describe it. Right, now, this is a piece by Amber Coker. Now, Amber works at the King's Foundation School of Traditional Arts in London, and she teaches on the painting there. Because of her heritage and cultural roots, this work actually is partly European, partly Mogul miniature painting, and it has, I think, an element of what's sometimes called Islami. But the thing that just impressed me most about this was the fact that I couldn't locate. It's a pure synthesis, get it? It's neither A nor B. It is a synthesis. It's this third proposition. It's this third element, this third object. And it's exquisite. And there's so much to enjoy. What I'd now like to do is talk about these two pieces of work, because one of the things that's key to these projects is you've got to understand that I don't choose work that I like or work by people who I even know or are familiar with. I bump into people, I browse the internet, I go to exhibitions, I think constantly about painting, and I also talk to people about what's going on and share information as a sense of community, right there. And the discourse, which is, and I believe painting is a discourse, it's a huge conversation that has no clear parameters or edges, right? But one of the most common threads to that discourse has always been the uncanny or the surreal or whatever. Now, I want to talk about Josie Jenkins' piece first, which I don't think you'd have to have a degree in art history to know that this is a riff on Las Meninas by Velázquez, right? Now, if you have to go and check it and look it up, you'll get it straight away. But what I find fascinating about this piece is the way that, and I'd been to the Prado, and I remember seeing Las Meninas for the first time, and it was staggering. It really is staggering. And where Velázquez is in the painting in the Prado, that's where Velázquez would be standing. And this is, you've got to remember that conceptually it's a very complicated painting. It's not simply a view. The painter is here standing, depicting himself in the painting at work just behind this huge canvas, and that gives you some indication of how big Las Meninas is. And in the foreground are the Las Meninas are the attendants and maids who accompanied the young princess, who I can't remember her name now, and there was a dog or two. But when Josie had seen it, right, or whether she'd seen a reproduction of it, she managed to, to conflate her personal experience with the experience of seeing the painting, but done in such a way that it's not simply testing boundaries or absurd. That is one of those irritatingly kitsch sort of toilet roll holders, covers rather, okay, that people used to put in their bathrooms or lavatories, whatever you want to call it, in the 60s and 70s, as if you didn't know what it contained. So that's one substitution. The aspidistra, the plant which was so much synonymous with so much post-war kind of suburban literature, keep the aspidistra flying, etc. And here, one of the Staffordshire doggies that people would quite often very proudly have them in their fireplace, either side of the fire, and they'd always be in pairs. But the idea of a dog that actually had carnations painted all over it, I don't think realism was the first thing in their minds when they produced it, but it became a stock, right? Okay, but it's very difficult to see, but up here where there are portraits, and I can't for the life of me remember, I know there are images here, there are these very curious sort of sub-my-pony fantasy sort of images in this, what Walpole would have called glooms, in this gloomy area. There's something else there which I haven't managed to identify, but this is what fascinated me, got me. This is an opening in the back of the actual painting, and I think it's thought that it was Philip the King was stepping in, or maybe he's in the mirror with the Queen there. Can't remember now. But what she's done is replaced His Highness with what is one of the most famous optical illusions called the blivet, or what Mad Magazine in the 60s referred to as the peyote. It's a very famous one, discovered by somebody whilst reading an aeronautical review or magazine. It seems to have 3 prongs when looking that way, but only 2 prongs when seen another way. Now, the fact that Josie, who's probably, I don't know, in her 20s or whatever, she's quite young, actually knows about that, or knows about the sensibility from the 60s and 70s, is fascinating. Right. Now, this is by Sasha Bowles. Sasha's work is terrific. She's managed to, with very, very economic means, this is called, I think it's called Father and Son, this piece, and it is an old photograph, a found photograph, very, very much of that Victorian period, where it's got a slightly sepia kind of sort of tint to it. And they were very stilted photos, because don't forget, I think flash in those days, to take a photograph took about 1.5 minutes, and to avoid blurring, there'd be brackets to hold the head in place and stuff like that. But what she does, or what Sasha does, is she takes something as familiar or unremarkable and prosaic as the family photo. You know, this is ostensibly the father and son, well, proud father and son, infant, but of course the idea that this curious other creature, this strangeness, but it's done so quietly, so sparely, and so matter-of-factly. Wonderful. I blush to talk about this one. It's one of my pictures. I said it in context. I've been working with people in workshops building these funny vintage crossover custom motorcycles, two of which I'm going to be showing in October at First Sight in Colchester in a show of painting. These are paintings, and there is a sort of link or a synergy between the bikes and the paintings. And the paintings are of the workshops where the componentry, the stuff of the bikes is made by some brilliant engineers. I'm like an art director. I don't have the skill, the facility to make the stuff, but I know what I want, as it were. Anyway, this is one of these workshops, and it's called Dark Arc Engineering. It's in Rendlesham, near Woodbridge, and it's run by a guy called Simon, well, we know him as Aubrey Aldred, and I work very closely with another person called Graham Hartley, who has built the bikes downstairs, or one of the bikes. Now, I've coupled these together because this is by Judith Tucker. Now, I have to go straight for it. Judith was killed in a head-on accident about 18 months ago, at least, and it came as a terrible shock to all of us. Judy was not only a brilliant painter and a great advocate of painting, but she was a brilliant academic and an inspirational teacher. She was also a close friend, and she and I did an In Conversation piece for Terps magazine. I think it was during COVID, probably about 2020. I'm very proud to say that copy, that edition, which is number 23, I think, has sold out. So there you go. But that's Judy. Now, this is a piece by Miranda Bolton. Now, I've never met Miranda, but I'm now a member of what's called the Contemporary British Painters, and I saw this on the web, and I've seen it in some shows, her work, in the last few years, and I was massively impressed. Most of them are ostensibly bunches of flowers. Now, flower painting, without getting too art historical, obviously, if you say flower paintings, I mean, I've made flower paintings, and again, some of them will be in the show at First Sight in October. It's because the reputation of flower painting, on my part, was because it was regarded as the province of the amateur, and it was unsophisticated, it was moribund, it was slight. And I thought, right, well, I'll have some of that, definitely. People like Amanda have taken it as iconic and worked with it, and I can't touch the painting, but I'm tempted to. This is where, and there's several other paintings in the show where this has happened, is where paint has not been sort of browbeaten and forced into kind of behaving properly, sort of as if it were an illustration, just using it to sort of get from A to B. This is A and B all at the same time. Brilliant. It's just, to say it's sensuous would be the understatement of the year. It's absolutely, it's raw paint, it's raw painting. But the choice of subject matter adds to the kind of complexity of the thinking behind it. This is a piece of work by Daisy Fior. Daisy, I met a few years ago, in fact, and immediately was impressed by these curious little constructions and maquettes that she makes, some of which look like small sort of pocket games of those sort of tilting or manipulative games. But the thing that I loved about this is, if you'd never heard of constructivism and somebody told you in a note or over the phone that it was red, white or off-white and black, there was a certain code of practice, and then forgot to tell you how things were configured or the general historical context, they come up with these wonderful, beautiful, I think, to use that word very carefully, small and intimate works that echo a constructivist sensibility, but have moved it on in a really exciting way. I think they're delightful, because you think you're familiar with this sort of work, and then you look at that and you suddenly realise you don't know it that well, and this is something else. Right. The next piece of work I'm going to talk about is by Stephen O'Driscoll. Stephen lives in France with his partner, and I think he was a student the very first year, 98 to 99, when I was appointed Professor of Painting at the Royal College of Art. Now, this painting, I mean, Jose Jenkins' one, it's a direct reference, it's a conscious reference to Velázquez, an appropriation or misappropriation. This, on the other hand, I think I can't look at this painting without thinking about Millet's Ophelia, right? It's absolutely defining painting of the pre-Raphaelite period because of the flame water. Forgive me, anybody who's actually seen that painting or was brought up with it, knows it well, will know that there's something kindred about this painting. And the thing that I really enjoy is just the sheer pleasure that Stephen takes in every aspect, every mark. There is a sensuality, there's a thoughtfulness, there's a joy in the whole project. Right, now these two little paintings are by a man called Mike Major. I met Mike when I was a student at the Royal College of Art when I was first there in 1972. Mike died just over almost a year ago now, and I found he was probably one of the most important peers and people I'd ever met as a student. He had a wonderful attitude towards painting, and as I think can be seen here, he understood the relationship between the painter and the subject and the paint, the medium. And the medium here is, what we say, a clear partner. In fact, on close scrutiny, these little figures bear sort of comparison to those wonderful little sort of, when painters in the 18th century would do huge vistas of Venice and things, there would always be, if you looked very closely, it always looked like a semicolon or a question mark strolling around outside the palazzo or whatever, okay? But I just think this beautiful, beautiful paint, the paint is extraordinary. It's one of those things that defines painting and differentiates it from illustration again. It's the function of the material, the medium. Right, I've hung these two together. This is by Rebecca Rees and this is by Daniel Bell, right? Now Daniel won the Contemporary British Painters Prize in late 2024 for a series of small paintings, all of which were about this size. And they have this wonderful, again, they're clearly paintings. They're oleaginous, to use that wonderful word, where the medium is interfering with the image or creating the image, and then varying degrees of description, I suppose, and yes, different degrees of figuration coexist in this one kind of sort of midden, practically. This is called Spider. Now, anybody who knows anything about arachnids will know that they have 8 eyes. They're extraordinary. You know, the fact that they are sort of like super insects or fascinated by them, as I am, and concerned about their survival. Look at this painting and think, this gets under your skin again. This is a pretty eerie piece of work, right? Now, the way that that is accomplished or achieved is because Daniel has, what should I say, rehearsed, for want of a better word, similar. He's working from a very particular sensibility that he's already established. Whereas here, in Rebecca's piece, and this is one of the pieces that I think Rebecca herself would say that is least representative of her work, right? And she makes some terrific paintings with wonderful narratives, and they are very immediate, they are very sort of, they seem of a whole. She had a show at the art station recently where she showed, I don't know, 80 or 90 paintings in one very small space. Very intense experience. But in one corner was this piece called, I think it's called Barely There, right? And I thought, my goodness, this is terrific, because this is one of the very few paintings that I've seen exhibited where uncertainty, hesitancy, a sense of apprehension, a nervousness abounds. I think it's a terrific piece of work. It reminds me of all of the things that I still myself to overcome when I'm painting. Yeah, and of course it's here because again it's the, as somebody said, it's the eyes that have it, and maybe the dentures. Terrific. And again, truth to materials. Here we are. We can see what it's painted on, what it's made of, and how it is painted. But the fact it's unresolved, to use that term, I think is what's really impressive. And the fact that she chose to show it in this state, exactly, I think is extraordinary and commendable. Right, this is by Narby Price. Narby is the chair of the currently the chair of the Contemporary British Painters. His work, at first glance, looks a bit like a photorealist sort of work, which is a sort of a catch-all kind of genre. But in actual fact, when you actually see the actual paintings, you realise it's the material, it's the stuff of paint. And it's behaving, and what's marvellous, it's behaving in a variety of different ways according to the things that are being depicted or described. In fact, it's very difficult to see in any light, but the bunch of flowers, you know, this sort of token of loss or memorial for something like an accident, as you know, in the street, which is a bunch of flowers. What is depicted as cellophane is actually painted using a transparent medium, and it's very difficult to see in this light. But it's rather like the lacquering you get on some books, where the text will be differentiated by a lacquer. There's a lacquer finish to it, but it's just a joy to see. It's exquisite painting, but it's the different languages, different degrees of finish or depiction, figuration, and the way that they are actually configured, the blatancy of these marks and brushstrokes, and the fact it's right on the edge of that sense of the illusion. Right. Okay. Right. The next piece is by Harriet Mina Hill, and I met Harriet. I think she had a piece in the Moors a couple of years ago. But anyway, and I was absolutely, when I looked her work up, and I was enthralled. She works with community projects, and it's complicated. The painting is a part of her wider practice. Now, I don't know if you can get a shot of the side here. It's not irregular support. That is a piece of concrete from a demolished tower block, right? But what's amazing about it is the degree, the kind of the exquisite and loving, for want of a better word, the accuracy, the figuration, and the sense of light and luminosity in it. Something that I, love about painting generally. But there's something vivid as hell about this. Terrific little painting. weighs a couple of tons, but apart from that, it's brilliant. I can't go into the ins and outs of the Aylesbury Enterprise Centre, etc. But I think one gets a sense of the dilapidation and neglect that's there, but not in the work. That's a manifestation of love. Now, this is by Alexander Costello. Alexander runs a gallery in, I think it's in Lowestoft, and it's called 303. Yeah, and it's a terrific program, really brilliant. Right, I met Alex because he and Rebecca Rees curated a show at the Cut in Halesworth about a year or so ago called For Folk's Sake. That's it, be careful how you say that. And the one thing that really impressed me about Alex's work, and Alex as a person, was his generosity of spirit, his enthusiasm, the fact that he does on a permanent basis what I try to do here each year, just for a month or so, is create a platform for others, because you enjoy their work, you want to share it, and you want to not promote it exactly in my case, but as I say, bring it to a wider audience. But his work is most people will know his work as rather collapsed, sort of very sort of casual, or, organic, sort of cardboard pieces that sort of list and flop and look very impermanent, which they are, of course, and with a lot of chance. But here, I saw this piece and I couldn't help but think about the drawings, and they were mescaline drawings actually, by André Masson, that were a very, very important part of the kind of automatism of the Surrealist movement in the, I think it's probably in the late 20s and early 30s. It's still growing, because every time you look away, you can't remember. I know generically how it's comprised and how it's configured, but I don't, for the life of me, I couldn't actually draw it for you and say what was there. Brilliant. Right. Two pieces of work. One by Shane Sinnott. Now, both Shane and Will. This is Shane Sinnott and Will Turner. Right. I'm going to talk about Shane's piece first. Shane was both of these guys were students at the Royal College of Art. I think Shane studied. I think he was there before I was professor. I'm not sure, but Will certainly was a student whilst I was professor. But anyway, Shane, who now lives in Switzerland, I think it's Geneva. He has. His earlier work was very much, it's in an area that fascinated me. It was very much vernacular. He'd looked at sort of, say, not just graphic novels, but cartoon strips, or bande dessin, as the French and the Belgians call them. And so he had this, he's always been culturally curious. And more recently, this piece, when I first saw it on the internet, I thought it was absolutely staggering, because it has some of the fragility that is in Rebecca's piece over there, and in some aspects of Alan's piece as well. It has echoes of something like a Greco-Roman mosaic, right? There's something, it's a waxing caustic on, oil paint waxing caustic on Hessian, which is why you get this curious broken sort of moire sort of pattern here, because that's the tooth of the Hessian showing through. But the image, it's called Girl with a Spear. That's right, yeah, Girl with a Spear. And you think, there's something, I love his work, because the more I think about it, the more startling and the more it fascinates me, the more it interests me, the more I want to know about it. And here, this curious sort of imagined, forgotten, remembered type, as it were. But Girl with a Spear. Now, whether that girl ever existed in a fresco somewhere, I really don't know. I don't think it matters. But it's as if he has reclaimed something historically that most of us can't even imagine. I think it's terrific. Now, talking of reclamation, I spoke to Will this morning on the phone, and I said, right, there's no way you can talk about this without talking about appropriation. And he said, yeah, of course, let's just go for it. In the 70s, when I was a student, by the way, appropriation was, the thing that heralded, the changing of the guard from modernism, which had become so, became a sort of a groupthink form of series of conventions. This was the first, appropriation was the first true symptom of postmodern sort of unrest, for want of a better term. Anyway, so Will was of that period. His practice is extremely diverse, from constructed reliefs and wonderful pieces of work. But it's always exquisite and refined. And the one thing we spoke about this morning was the fact that he had felt at ease. This was part of his world. He grew up with Picasso. This is so, and the idea of actually, trying to be original went out with the in the 70s, right? And I was there, and it's still a force for his generation. I think it's really impressive because, as I say, it raises real issues about originality and authenticity, and they're things that Will has the sheer has the nerve, the chutzpah to actually confront. Yeah. Right, let's go in the other room. And there's 4 or 5 more pieces. Can we start with Sally's here? Yeah, right. Now, this is by Sally Crowley, my wife, and it's been around for a few years. The iconography is self-evident. It's one of those shiny, chrome-type caravans. Right, but what's important is that Sally's passionate about recycling and takes paper and makes her own paper from all manner of things, whether it's bills, documents, packaging or whatever, and produces this wonderfully toothed, sort of irregular, organic sort of paper, which is not, by its very nature, that easy to draw upon. But she persevered with this pen and wash piece of caravan. And it's still one of the finest things she's made. It's terrific. And there's a lot to look at, there's a lot to enjoy. Oh, Louise Catrell. Right, now Louise, I think, was a student when I was, before I was professor at the Royal College. And I met her on various shows that we've been involved in and projects and stuff. And it's called Islet, and now that's not E-Y-E-L-E-T, it's I-S-L-E-T, Islet, right? I.e. a very small island. Now, yes, it's got the Turner S, but I think it transcends any of that. The idea of, the landscape being pervaded by mist, and only and very occasionally coming into focus, there is a dynamism, a kind of a poetry to this, that yes, the legacy is of Turner because he set that What's It free, but there's something about the way that the light trickles and bounces around in this piece. It's absolutely brilliant. I think it's one of the finest things she's ever painted. Right, and the reason it's hanging next to Pippa Gatti's piece, which is Light Through the Trees, is basically because although they're ostensibly landscapes and they're broadly about light and the experience of landscape, by the way, not necessarily the appearance of landscape, right? And this, Pippa's work generally, I think it's one of those 2 ways to skin the same cat sort of project, but there's something about the way that the surface of Pippa's pictures, rather like Daniel Bell's, have this kind of glaucous sort of varnished. It's not even varnished, it's kind of liquid, sort of viscous, as I say, glaucous sort of surface through which you gradually, same as in Louise's work, you gradually construct the experience of landscape or reconstruct it through inspecting the parts. Terrific. Yeah, that's a terrific painting. This is by Angelina May Davis. I haven't got the title to hand, and I've forgotten. Oh, yes, that's Light Through. I have forgotten the title of this, so forgive me, Angelina. When I saw, I'd heard of Angelina's work, or I'd seen it in some show, and I Googled it, and I thought, how fascinating. These are egg tempera, by the way. That has that wonderful kind of, I find these highly evocative of a time when British painting in the 30s and 40s was influenced in a very complicated way by surrealism and by contemporary developments in France and continental Europe at the time. No, there is something about this that it stands outside of time or history in a sense. And then there's wonderful little moments. This, what I take to be a galleon floating around in what looks like a small pond or tub or whatever, but then the incongruity of the ruching of these elements here. It really is a dreamscape, because there's something kind of wonderfully accurate, vivid, and with devices like this that make it almost sort of rather like a theatre set, a backdrop to a kind of a drama from the 30s. Yeah, there's something beautiful, terrific. And this is, I'm going to have to read Neil's name, Neil Zakowitz. Now, Neil shows with Dom O'Byle as well. And this one is called, and I will get it right, You, Me and Him. And the way that Neil, these ostensibly abstract, small, wonderfully kind of vibrant paintings, yeah, he's done what is ostensibly a portrait of Warhol with that very famous sort of gesture where he does that sort of thing to the side of his face, Warhol that is. And it's just enough information to identify it. This is not, in my opinion, and I think as the title suggests, right, I've got to get it right again, You, Me and Him, it's not a portrait, but it's invested with the idea of profile and likeness. And there's something very curious about the way Neil constructs paintings, or how he regards them, because that looks like a framing device, only it couldn't possibly be a frame. I think they're terrific. And now, I want to talk about these two pieces together, because this is serendipitous. Right, first and foremost, here's a painting by Paula MacArthur, and I will read the title. It's called Coming Home to a Place We've Never Been Before. Right, okay, now, it's very complicated. I'm not going to read the full statement that Paul has written, but there is something very powerful. Her work is concerned with value, with life, with transience and light, and she finds that in geodes, gemstones, and the kind of the way that light is refracted by these objects into an extraordinary. It becomes vibrant, becomes memorable. But having said that, right, I looked at it for a while and I thought there's something about that painting that's rather familiar. I couldn't put my finger on it until Emily Catrell came in. Now, Emily used to work at the art station in Saxmundham. Now, her background is in a sculptor who then studied fashion textiles as a master's. Anyway, and I had seen a few photographs of these pieces, and I suddenly realised, I know where I've seen that, and because that was familiar, the idea of those gaunt figures who are in mourning, hanging around in the boats on the River Styx, on their way to what is the Isle of the Dead, which is Boclin's Isle of the Dead, which, if any of you watching this have ever seen, is one of those images which imprints itself really, really vividly. So there was the way that this speaks of mourning, as in loss, and the way that speaks of Boclin's Isle of the Dead. It's basically, it's like so much of the work and so much of my experience of painting, like Josie Jenkins' piece particularly, and several others, you do not see things in isolation, right? And that strike a very particular and resonant, a very particular chord. Right, this little painting here, and it is quite small by most people's standards, this is by Michael Crowther. Mike has just had a terrific show, probably one of the best shows he's ever done, at Benjamin Rhodes in London, I think South East London somewhere. I went to see the show. I thought it was an absolutely terrific show. I can't remember the title of the show. It's a place in Yorkshire, and a lot of what Mike's work is about memory, okay? And this, when I was a child, I used to have, before there were rubber hot water bottles, there were little stone pigs, as they were called, right? And I think, I'm venturing, so Michael, I'm sure, will correct me, or everybody else, that's the stopper, that's where the water goes in, and that was so you could hold it without scalding yourself. They're just beautifully poetic, small, they're like little shards of memory, little bits that trigger something much larger. A catalyst, yeah. I've spoken before about being apprehensive, being nervous, being aware of the weight of history in some cases, or just the old existential thing about how to go about doing anything, right? And Rebecca, obviously, her piece of work touches on it, perhaps more so than most. But this little piece by Paul Smith, I thought was terrific because it's so easy to join up the dots, I mean metaphorically, when you're painting, whereas everything here is broken and partial. It's, you know, it's, I don't know, maybe it's a damp patch in a wood or something. That's not really what's important, as far as I'm concerned. What excites me is the fact that I envy people who've got the ability to stop there. I'm one of those people who have to go on to the end it's almost like autodidacticism, to explain to myself how things work or what things are or what their name is. Here, Paul hasn't felt the pressure to do that and has remained essentially visual. Brilliant. What I'm going to do first is talk about Simon Keenly-Side's little piece, which I think is, it's dated 2001 to 24, and the title is Until the Morning. Now, the thing I love about Simon's work is the way that, I mean, all right, it doesn't take 23 years to make a 6-inch square painting, but Simon works on a whole batch of work, getting it out, reworking it. And this painting, even from 20 or 30 feet away, visually is stunning because optically everything starts to mix, everything is broken, everything is partial, everything is inferred, nothing is explicit. It has echoes of Paul's piece of work that I've just been talking about, but it takes it in a different direction. It relies more upon the paint and revisions, as it were, to actually create something like the memory of an experience, whether it's a landscape or whatever, and I think it might well be, or a time of day until the morning. Yeah, great. Charlotte's paintings. I've met Charlotte, and it's a long time ago, but I was Googling some paintings, and I think Charlotte is a member of the Contemporary British Painters, the CBP, and I got on her website, and I was absolutely blown away. The intensity of her paintings, you know, the way that the way she animates what looks like a flat colour with these curious, if you look, these little patches, right, that seem to be more strident, stronger here, closer to us, as it were, in an illusionistic sense, until here they are, like small damp patches, okay? The control, the knowledge, the empathy, the sympathy, as it were, with the material is brilliant. And also to this very wonderful sort of device where there's little breaches of the surface of the pigment. Things abut, they just brush against each other. And these extraordinarily strident sort of, you know, stems, the trees, whatever. It's absolutely delightful. And there's no simple distinction between background and foreground in terms of the way it's executed. I mean, we organise it because these look like trees, that looks like a building. So we can organise it spatially. But when you look closely at the way that she's choreographed the handling of the paint here, with these very, very transparent, luminous little passages, you know, the lights inside that building, terrific. That's it.